Hello and welcome to another selection of the hottest Q&As Reddit has to offer. Former bank robber here. AmA. Aside from your freedom and robbing banks, what's the one thing you miss the most about the outside while you were in the clink? Hugs. I've never been in jail or prison, but I miss these too. Over the course of your entire career, how much did you make? Not very much. Probably like 5 figures. At that point I feel like it's just easier to work for the bank lol. Mother effer, that's called a job. Is there a bond between bank robbers in prison? Like, do you guys swap stories and become friendly because you're in for the same thing? Oddly, yes. I imagine it's no different than people who've played the same sport or can play the same musical instrument. What rules did you have about engagement during robberies? Presence of kids? Violence? No violence. Just walked in and acted as a regular customer. When it was my turn, I handed the teller a note saying to give me their $50s and $100s. I typically clarified that I didn't have a weapon or any intention of hurting them. Fill out a robbery form and go to the back of the line. What movie do you think is a realistic heist movie? One mean from planning to execution to aftermath. I don't think any of them are very realistic. Hollywood doesn't really do realism all too well. It's like asking which porn is the most realistic. By default, the professional movies are all a bit fantasy. If I had to pick, I'd say Office Space is probably the most realistic. Well, if that's what gets you off, but I had sex once and it was nothing like Office Space. Are there any strange, weird moments that stood out to you during your robberies? Like, things you remember but aren't sure why. Maybe the exact outfit a customer was wearing or something. While waiting in line during the first robbery I did, there was a girl standing in front of me. She had a great butt. Somewhere out there is a girl who doesn't know that a bank robber complimented her butt. At what point did you have the thought, I might have fricked up? I've never quite fully felt that way, frankly. What was the closest call for you, where you actually got away with whatever you were doing? Probably the last one. The lady/teller kinda freaked out and started screaming to lock the doors. It was a tad stressful to say the least, but I managed to just turn around and walk out as though nothing were happening. They did lock the doors, but it was just after I'd walked out. I don't think the intent was to trap me there, so it's not like I barely got away in that sense. But it was still way too close for comfort. That was the end of it for me. How did the other prisoners treat you when they heard you were a bank robber? There's a weird level of respect that the guys inside have for bank robbers. I don't know why, but that's just the way it is. They're fascinated with it just like anyone else. Probably because in American history some of the most notorious villains were bank robbers. Crazy story, what was going on in your head when you were robbing banks? Was it a huge adrenaline rush? Were you scared? Nervous? I would like to know what goes on when you commit a crime like that. Thanks. It felt a bit like riding a roller coaster. There's a sense of danger, but ultimately, it was safe enough to check out. It's obviously riskier than riding a roller coaster, but that's the best analogy I can make. It was crazy, and it was scary. But to some, that's what makes life fun. I'll have to check it out then. How difficult is it really to rob a bank and get away with it? Who organizes the whole operation? Not very. The only person involved, if they're smart. Right, you don't often hear about the people that got away with it in the long term. If I drove say 800 miles away from where I live to a city 2 states away, and I only robbed one bank, what are the odds I would get caught? I'd rather deal in percentages than odds. Ratios have always bothered me a bit. Officially, I'd estimate a 60% failure rate for the scenario you've described. Don't do it. Being rejected by Amazon after being recruited by Amazon, I get the feeling you want to talk about this. What happened with Amazon? Pretty much. Got through to orientation and all that stuff. They called a few days before my first day and basically said never mind. The most annoying part was that I spoke openly at every step, from the recruiter to the person who interviewed me and then the person who led orientation, about my criminal history and asked if I was wasting my time. Amazon will still sell my book. I just can't work at the place that ships it to you. What types of prisoners were treated the best and worst by fellow inmates and prison guards? Worst equals sex offenders. Best equals everybody else. I've heard some terrifying stories about what they do to more specifically rapists and pedophiles. Sucks to suck. So now that you've been out of incarceration, what are you doing for a job and finding a way to make ends meet? Does being a former convict and listed as a bank robber deter you from certain jobs and all that as well? I worked the first job I could get after first getting out. I worked there, production-related work, for just over a year before getting a job in the oil and gas industry. I worked there for a few years and then got out because of an injury. There are definitely certain jobs I can't do these days because of my past. For example, bank teller is probably out of the question. The law doesn't provide for discriminating against ex-cons, but most corporations still do exactly that. For the records, I support a company's right to not hire someone based on their past. I actually wish the laws were a little different there because there's just a crap ton of wasted time going into looking for a job because you think things are fair when they're really not. I'd much rather a company be able to proudly boast, hey, keep your former criminal butt away from us, because I would do exactly that and look for the former felony-friendly companies instead. Do you think the sentence fitted the crime? No. I think I got less time than I deserved. I'm forever grateful that the judge had something better in mind for me. I've never spoken with him or heard his point of view in detail, but I definitely don't think I got what I deserved. In hindsight, it worked out for the better. Maybe I'm wrong about how many years I deserved or whatever. But I still feel like I got a poop ton of mercy and all of that. Have you ever considered doing a podcast? Especially since your book says you have a lifelong best friend that grew up to be a cop. I can just see this storyline of an ex-bank robber and an ex-cop, neither of who see eye to eye with societal norms of what they're expected to be like, being something that people couldn't turn off. Especially if both you guys are funny. Something to think about. I mean, I'd subscribe. Yes. And that friend wants to D. LOL, I just realized who that was. You ducking idiot. What's the biggest thing entertainment gets wrong about bank robbing? How much money you get. Well, everyone that I know who robs banks only does it for the passion, not the money. Get paid for your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. I'm not fully read up on your story, but was your history of crime gradual in smaller offenses, or did you go directly to the bank robbery? What could those around have done to prevent this path? The worst crime I'd ever committed prior to the bank stuff was probably stealing candy from a store as a child. There was an incident in my mid-20s where I filed a fraudulent police report saying that someone had stolen my identity, but I don't know how illegal it was since I was pretty vague about the whole thing. Good question. I wish I had something more interesting to say about it. What would have been your answer or question? Leave it in the comments below. Slap that like and subscribe button for more, and check out the link in the video description for even more answers. Peace out, and catch you in the next video.